So, hey everybody, and welcome to the next episode of In Conversation With. If you're joining us over on Friday night on the Azure-ish Live Twitch.tv channel, thanks so much for tuning in. Please do take part in the chat below, get involved, ask your questions, it's really appreciated. Don't forget to hit that follow button though, so you'll get notified next time we go live. If you're on catch-up on YouTube, thanks so much again for tuning in and watching this video. Please do like and subscribe, it's always welcome. Okay, so my next guest this week, he's based in Los Angeles, California, and he's the founder of PowerTools.dev, which is the fastest way to ship your software on your own Azure, AWS, or GCP cloud platform. And I'm really pleased to have him on the show this week. He's going to give me a run through of those very tools and obviously talk a little bit about the background behind them. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With is Mr. Jon Morehouse. So, hi, Jon. How you doing? Thanks for joining me.
Hey, how's it going? And thanks for having me. I appreciate you letting me be here.
Oh, not at all. It's cool to have you. Actually, when you reached out to me on Twitter, I took a quick look at the PowerTools platform that you've developed now, and it looks really cool. So, really excited to kind of dig into all that good stuff. But I guess before we get started on that, I don't know if you want to give yourself a quick intro and just let people know who you are, what you're up to, all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jon. Super excited to be here again. I am a developer based in Los Angeles, and sort of my niche in the software world of sorts has been basically infrastructure building, development platforms, and things like that. And I'm currently the CEO of PowerTools. I've been building PowerTools for about a year. We are a software platform that lets you deploy apps to your own AWS or GCP account. Or Azure account, and yeah, it's been quite a fun ride. We are about a year in, still an early stage startup, but definitely give us a shot.
No, that's cool. And like I said, I did have a quick look on your website. So, I mean, I guess before you tell us a little bit about the background behind it, I suppose we should let everybody know how we can find you. And it's at PowerTools.dev, Jon. That's right, isn't it?
Yep.
So I just got your website up on the screen here now. So I mean, I suppose just as we're just having a quick scroll of the web page here, Jon. I don't know if you want to give us a little bit of, about the background behind PowerTools, how it came to be, why it was a thing that you wanted to get involved with developing, all that good stuff.
Yeah, totally. I always kind of joke that I built this product out of frustration.
Okay.
I basically, for the past, I'd say 5 or 6 years, I have kind of been building the same sort of products. I realized that company after company ends up building their own internal software platform. So basically, every company has their own flavor of integrating continuous integration with continuous deployment, with, now it's infrastructure as code with containers.
Yeah.
And, for me, I've kind of, built a living going from company to company and helping set up these platforms. Ultimately, I got a little frustrated and realized that this should be a business.
Okay.
PowerTools was my attempt at never building this product again, which is always
Okay.
a funny way to start a business.
But that's cool though, yeah. So you were basically going out there and doing a lot of these setups, like you say, for other businesses in your day job and doing the same thing over and over again. Like, I guess that's one of the fundamental rules of development, is that you write once, use many times. So is that the most basic way I can frame how this platform has come to be, Jon?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I've learned building this company is that 9 out of 10 companies are building their own internal software platform. Every company's chasing this Heroku-like magical developer experience, and that's really what we've given you with PowerTools. We give you a tool with PowerTools that lets you ship any type of app, whether you're doing microservices or monolith or internal or public app, or you're just building an admin panel or you're building a public app. We give you one tool that lets you ship, deploy, operate, and really encapsulates the entire life cycle of software development. All on your own cloud account, and that's come with its own challenges. And I think we're the first company to do anything like this, where we're building completely on top of your AWS or GCP account, and that's really our hypothesis and where we're at. And I guess we'll talk a little bit about on cloud and what that means.
Yeah, I guess so. So, I mean, just in terms of the power tools, what kind of things? So, I noticed on the website on the website there, you're talking about serverless PaaS services, I guess, container and static sites, features within the cloud platforms. Are you basically able to kind of hook into them? Give us a bit of a flavor as to what you're actually doing behind the scenes there in terms of hooking into the various cloud platforms, John.
Yeah, totally. So we give you a single experience on top of Azure, on top of AWS or GCP. And what we do under the scenes is we give you the concept of a cloud component. Instead of sort of building out a load balancer, setting up an API gateway and an SSL certificate and your DNS, and building, creating a build and deploying it and configuring logs and metrics, what we do is we give you a single command that does all of that for you. So when you deploy a PowerTools app or a service, we basically map your config to whether it's cloud native resources like an AWS Lambda, or it's if you're deploying a container, we'll give you an SSL certificate, and we'll set up your DNS and load balancers and things like that. So it's a combination of both. What we've really done is we've encapsulated, kind of combined both worlds, where I talk about developers versus software teams. We've combined that like developer experience of like Heroku, where everyone's familiar with Heroku, or Netlify is another great example.
I was going to say, for those people that maybe aren't familiar with something like Heroku, do you want to give a bit of a flavor, a bit of a background as to what that's all about, and I guess what's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I mentioned Heroku, and it's a big part of our story. Heroku's interesting because back in 2010 or 2009, whenever it launched, it was sort of game changing, because as a developer, you could write code, create a Heroku config, push your code to GitHub or wherever, and all of a sudden, your app's on a URL. Your app has an SSL certificate. It has everything for you to say, hey, here's my Ruby server. I just followed a tutorial. I got something working, and push my code. Heroku just does everything else. Heroku gives you a load balancer. It gives you auto scaling. It gives you an SSL certificate. Your URL just works. And this power of, hey, I want to write code, I want to click a button, and I want a URL, is ultimately, and at least for me, like, how I made a living. Like, developers, software teams are chasing that. It's still an unsolved problem, and that's sort of the legendary developer experience that, as an industry, we've gotten so far away from. From a variety of different things that have complicated software development. Software is not as easy in 2021 as publishing a little bit of code and having it working on a URL.
So why is that then, John? Is that purely around the fact that cloud services and cloud platforms now, and I suppose from a dev viewpoint, is that because there are so many different features and functions and things that you can kind of spin up in the cloud that sometimes it's a bit of a minefield? Is that, because I say that from the ops side of the fence, if you like, from an operational point of view, there's lots to consider. Is that kind of the nuts and bolts behind the scenes for why you've gone down this road with Power Tools? Is it because it's just that landscape is so a mash with lots of different features and functionality?
Yeah, and I think something that that I realized, it's like we always ask, like, why is software so complicated, right?
Yeah.
And at least for me, when I started building Power Tools, I wanted to build a container as a service. That was my initial product. Like, I was like, I want to build a Heroku on top of AWS. And what I started to realize when I talked to real life companies is there's really three types of software that are common in 2021. There's static sites. So, there's the concept of like, hey, I have a pre-generated set of HTML files and JavaScript files that are running my web app. The name of the game there is, I want my build on a CDN as fast as possible. I want to be able to validate it. I want to be able to deploy it. And, ultimately it matters about how many points of presence, how many different CDN pops can I deploy my code to in real time so that all my users have access, can download it, etc.
Sure. Okay.
That was the first paradigm. Like, everyone asked for static sites. The second one was containers. We were spot on there. Kubernetes and Docker have just created this explosion of backend complexity.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about containers is containers originally were, technical pieces aside, containers were all about packaging dependencies, really. Like, when we first started talking about containers 10 years ago, it was mind-blowing because all of a sudden, you package your entire, OS image with your code. That has come along with this microservice movement and, observability movement. And so that was really a lot. Obviously, almost every software company is building on containers now. And,
cool. Yeah.
And finally, so we've talked about static sites, containers, and it was serverless. So It's not enough to build a platform that just does one or the other. There's three: static sites, containers, and serverless. Developers love serverless because you don't have to handle anything. You write your code, you push it, etc. And AWS or GCP or Azure, they handle sort of scaling out the underlying compute for you. And so serverless is an appealing modern workflow. The software teams I've talked to are not using serverless for their main application development. They're using serverless to build webhooks and small integrations. It's an easy way to build these sort of, architectures that are very event-driven. Building completely on top of Lambda is really not an option for most companies, just because there's so many things that are missing, from tracing to logging, metrics, and maybe those tools exist, but it's a completely new paradigm. So it's hard to hire into those types of roles.
Yeah.
Whereas with containers, almost every developer has Docker on their machine at this point. Every developer can run, Docker Compose and get their applications running. So for us, it was almost a little frustrating because, we set out to build this platform, and we're like talking to real users and real software teams, and we're like, what is it going to take for you to use our product instead of building your own? And almost every software team we talked to had built some type of experience for one of the three. They had something basic for containers. They had, their CTO had cobbled together Kubernetes on some platform, and they had CI, maybe Circle CI set up, right, to do their builds. And what we started to realize was, and this is actually one of the reasons why we're building platforms as an industry, is, all the modern platforms miss the mark. Modern software platforms might give you a great developer experience. You use Netlify. Netlify, for those who don't know it, is basically a Heroku for front end, for static sites.
Okay.
Netlify has a incredible build process that basically takes your Next.js or your React app, and you push it, they build it, deploy it, etc. Very, very simple. And they build a lot of these really nice developer features. They give you, preview URLs. You have observability into the whole thing. It's really a modern Heroku-like experience for static sites.
With you, yeah.
So, we started looking, and we were like, well, first of all, the first question we had was, why are you building this thing? Why are you building your own internal platform? And then the second one was, why aren't you using the world of products? Like, there's Netlify, there's Heroku, there's Render, there's all these different flavors of the day platforms. And then third, what is it going to take for you to buy one? And I'll answer those questions. Ultimately, most of the software teams we found, maybe they're using Netlify. Netlify was the most common. They were using Netlify for their front end, you know, if you look at Netlify, they have, you know, incredible logos, and they let you deploy your static site in seconds. No company that we talked to wanted to be building on a managed PaaS long term. So the companies that we talk to, whether it's for serverless or it's containers, almost every company and I've talked to 300, you know, it's a big part of our story. We've had a lot of these conversations. Every single company we talked to wanted to be on AWS, GCP, or Azure. And if you're not on that cloud now, you want to be on there later. And
that's just to completely go and build and deploy their own applications, and whether that be serviced from a central location or given to other companies to deploy via these tools. That's the general theme, is what you're saying, is it? Is that the dev experience of deploying an application is directly to cloud native functionality rather than the traditional sort of monolith like you suggested earlier.
Yeah, and you know, ultimately companies want to be in control of their own destiny.
Sure.
When you're building on AWS, you get to work with, you know, everything you need in terms of going lower and lower level. AWS is, and I have a quote somewhere, it's like AWS is the new bare metal. You know, AWS building directly on AWS is the new racking your own servers, because obviously they give you, you know, obviously you don't have to rack your own servers when you're using GCP or whatever, but they give you these low-level primitives. And so the value add of building on top of one of these major cloud platforms for a company, if you're a CTO choosing to do this, you're not really doing any risk. You're not bringing any risk about, because you know ultimately as you scale up and as you hit, you know, some type of, whether it's scale or complexity somewhere, you can always go lower level. It's easy to hire experts. You can go and you know that you're never going to reach AWS scale, right? Like almost no company is ever too big for AWS, apart from AWS, right? And you know, it's interesting because leaders of companies care so much about having that extensibility, having the control of being on AWS or GCP or Azure, being able to go low level and architect their systems in a way where they can sort of combine these lower level primitives and do their own bare metal. And so what I've started to realize, and this is one of the things with PowerTools that's so interesting, is like, you know, companies would much prefer a poor developer experience on AWS, GCP, or Azure and build it themselves than use somebody else's cloud platform.
Right. Okay.
And a fundamental belief for myself, and one of the reasons I've started this business, is these third-party cloud platforms are incredible. Like, they're amazing. You can push a button and you can deploy your code in seconds. They're built for developers, though. They're not built for software teams. I haven't seen a cloud platform that is truly built for software teams. And software teams have much different concerns. They care about rotating secrets. They care about their internal and public network. They want the developer experience of Heroku or Netlify, but that's a nice to have. They care about extensibility. They want to be able, you know, to hire folks to work on top of a platform. And they're willing, software teams are willing to sacrifice workflow niceisms to have ultimately, whether it's security or extensibility or optionality, just control. And that's a core piece of our business. And that's really our thesis, is that companies want to be on AWS, GCP, and Azure. And that's not changing. It's not going anywhere. And you know, they're willing to sacrifice developer experience to be on one of those clouds.
No, I'm with you. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, now you're explaining it to me from that perspective. Obviously, tools like this are kind of, I guess, like you say, if teams are currently building their own tools, and there are other tools out there that do one of the three kind of platforms, as you suggested earlier, it kind of makes sense. I get the background. So, I mean, what's going on under the hood then in terms of Power Tools? Because, of course, we know from developers or software developers or even infrastructure people, there's this thing called infrastructure as code that has been around for a fair amount of time. We know we've got CI/CD pipelines, and I'm guessing some software development that deploys straight into cloud platforms is teams are probably using those kind of tools and techniques to kind of do their thing, I guess. So, I mean, how does Power Tools kind of differentiate from that way of working, and what is going on under the hood? How do you hook into those cloud platforms? And I guess you've got the challenge then of keeping up to date with the APIs as they progress and features expand. Have you got all of those things behind the scenes, I guess, John? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. It's always funny when I talk to teams doing infrastructure as code, because we've kind of taken it as this blind sort of mandate. Everyone wants to make their AWS account declarative, which is ultimately what infrastructure as code is. The idea is, like, I have a set of schemas and configs to manage my AWS account, and it's easy to understand what's going on and things like that. For Power Tools, we give you that Heroku-like developer experience with a single command. So we don't use Terraform, we don't use CloudFormation. When you download Power Tools and you sign up, we ask you for your AWS credentials, and we ask you, what environment do you want? Do you want to name your production environment alpha or beta or gamma, or do you want to do production, stage, testing? We ask you what region, what cloud accounts to use, whether it's Azure, GCP, whatever. And what we do behind the scenes is we build, whether it's for containers, a Kubernetes cluster, we set up a private VPC on your cloud. We'll configure your DNS, so we set up a DNS zone for your entire workspace, and so you have a root domain you can deploy apps to. So PowerTools.dev is our root domain, and we have apps underneath that.
With you,
and
yeah, okay.
we install CI/CD for you. We set up some infrastructure so that Power Tools, the platform, works. And what's interesting is we do all this in kind of a magical way, because we never send your credentials to our server. Your credentials never leave your machine. We don't have an API, that's configuring an IAM role and updating your AWS account or doing your deploys or your builds. One of our core beliefs, and we've talked to hundreds of companies about this, is that if you're a software team, you don't want to risk it all on a new startup. You want to know, especially if you're compliance oriented, you want to know that ultimately you're able to trust a platform. You're not giving access to your infrastructure to a third party, and that's how we've designed our platform. Power Tools is decentralized. When you sign up, everything happens from your machine. We configure your entire AWS account, your entire GCP account, your entire Azure account, and it just works. Under the hood, we give you a CLI, so you download our CLI. We built it in Go, and one of the reasons we built it in Go was so that it would be portable, and we don't want you to have to be configuring static library or linking libraries or adding into any dependencies. You download the binary and it just works. And the CLI itself is what is in charge of managing your AWS account. Once you've signed up, we will set up a Kubernetes cluster for each environment, a network for each environment, build infrastructure and things like that. And you get that Heroku-like developer experience. You push your code, your PowerTools CI automatically deploys it. If you want to run your code locally and preview it, you can do that with PowerTools. Your builds work. We have hooks and linters and all those sorts of nice to haves built in. And what we've done is we've really built this for software teams. And I would say one of the most controversial things we did was we built your PowerTools workspace so it works with a mono repo first. So for those of you who aren't familiar, a mono repo is basically this concept of you have one code repository for your entire software team. You have all your apps in one place, all your code in one place. And so we built a lot of features for for mono repos. And that was like a really core decision of ours, because we realized that software teams were building on mono repos.
Sure. Okay.
And so from there, that's really how we got started. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
So with PowerTools, we really designed our product for teams. Mono repos, is the first controversial decision. And, the concept of having your infrastructure completely set up and managed for you without writing a bunch of infrastructure as code, without, investing in Terraform or Pulumi or whatever the tool is. And so PowerTools is really, I guess there's this new movement called infrastructure as software. Which is really what we are. But ultimately, we build your workspace. It's a one-time cost for you. You can always change it and we'll sync it and things like that.
Yeah.
But once your workspace is set up, you then have a platform for your team where your developers get to develop, build, deploy, and operate from one place. And so they have one CLI. You run PT.dev and you develop your app. You run PT build. You preview your changes locally. We have a lot of nice features built into every piece of this. For instance, with PT.dev, we give you the option of running your code live inside of your Kubernetes cluster. So if you're building a static site or you're building an internal API, we will run your code in a container live on your cloud, which is really, really nice, because you can do things like, develop and run your tests locally within your cloud environment. You can do things like share your local build as I can be live coding my website and share URL with you. And, from across the world, you can see the changes I'm making in real time.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I take it there's when you set up this workspace initially, then you're setting up, a set of variables. Is it declared there? Is it declared in code or in YAML or something along those lines, where you're kind of picking the services and the regions and the subscriptions that you want to use to deploy this software into? Is that how you've got it working behind the scenes, or is there a little bit more to it?
We have we create a YAML schema, which is basically what we do is we ask you, what do you want to name your environments and what cloud account do you want them in?
Okay, cool. And that's all stored in YAML, and that's used to actually do the deployments into the cloud platform, I presume, then, something along those lines.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And so when you're using PowerTools, instead of learning like the Kubernetes YAML or the learning Terraform or Pulumi or writing software, we actually generate the YAML for you, first of all. When you sign up, we ask you some questions. Since we're an early startup, I've been helping a lot of the companies sign up, and I'll literally create the YAML schema for you. And when you run sync or as part of your sign up process, we automatically use that to build your infrastructure and pick the environments you're in and the domains you want to use and set up CI, CD and things like that. Cool. And from there, then you get that developer experience of like a Heroku or a Netlify on your own cloud account. Your developers just get to run PT.dev to run their code. They get to do PT build when they want to run their test. PT deploy when you want to deploy it. PT logs. It's all built in, and you don't have to switch between different tools and products. And most importantly, this happens with one command. And instead of setting up GitHub Actions, we set that up for you. Instead of setting up a VPC or figuring out, we were on AWS before and we want to be on Azure now.
Right.
How do I learn Azure words for all these things? And so what's powerful is you can actually have your test and your production environment in different clouds. So for
Hmm.
instance, for us, all of our internal stuff is on AWS, and our public apps are the website, it's all in GCP.
Hmm.
And so it's really nice to have one workspace where you can just deploy between any cloud account. Um, the
Yeah. I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say that's pretty clever, yeah. And like you say, you're kind of just abstracting that layer of complexity away from from your developer effectively, and you're just declaring the workspaces that they're going to be pushing their code and their application into.
And what's interesting is, and to kind of get out of the weeds a little bit on our product, I
Hmm.
think what's interesting here is someone may ask, well, why this abstraction? What does it give me? Why not HashiCorp Waypoint? Why not VMware Tanzu?
Okay.
And this comes down to one of my core beliefs, and something we've honestly battle tested with a lot of our customer conversations, and that's this belief that software tools are either on one end of the spectrum. They're either on the developer end of the spectrum, where I'm a sole developer and I have so much optionality to deploy my weekend project. If
Hmm.
you're a solo developer, PowerTools probably doesn't make sense for you unless you're interested in the platform,
Sure.
because there are cheaper ways to deploy software.
Hmm. Okay.
For us, we run on your own AWS account, and you're going to spend $100 a month at least to run a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
about the minimum you're going to get with PowerTools. On the other end of the spectrum is the enterprise world, where you know basically you look at the HashiCorp Waypoints, the VMware Tanzus, and products like that, and they're built for enterprises. Like,
Hmm.
and that's actually one of the reasons why cloud computing is so complex, because you look at AWS and GCP and Azure. Where do they make their money? Major companies, not small
Hmm.
startups and software teams. And so a lot of the enterprise world of software is built to manage these specific extensions or customizations or configurations
Hmm.
that huge companies need. And so if you look at it, it's like, if you're a developer, you have every option in the world. If you're an enterprise, you have every option and resource in the world. But what about the middle?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
With you.
and so the middle is where PowerTools lives. Like, we sort of bridge the two worlds, where we give you that day one developer experience of a developer focused product like a Heroku, or a Netlify or a Vercel. And then on the other side, as you scale up, we have the features you need as an enterprise. And for instance, because we never touch your cloud credentials from our servers, we never have access to your infrastructure. If you're using PowerTools and you signed a BAA with AWS, you're HIPAA compliant. You're not adding a new party into the mix.
Hmm.
If you were a fintech company, you're not requiring a third party to have access to your infrastructure. Everything happens from your
Sure.
machine. Everything, like, I can turn the API off. Like,
Hmm.
we test this. Turn our API off and your product still works.
Sure.
Um, and it's truly decentralized, and that's a core belief. The other one is, we want you to be able to set up your infrastructure completely without even knowing PowerTools.
Hmm.
But when you sign up, we build your workspace schema for you. We run sync. We walk you through everything. It just works. There's no learning. Hey, how does there's no learning, like, how do you run Terraform, or how do
Yeah. Sure.
what even is a VPC? You don't need to know
Yeah.
anything about AWS to use our products. But as you dig deeper and deeper, you can do things like, you can customize your workspace. You can add, your own request tracing. You can add,
Hmm.
you can peer your networks and link them together, and you can hire an SRE or an ops person
That's cool.
to
So
build.
so you don't need to know that day one. You can just jump on in, sign up, and get going. But the point is, it is extensible in that regard. That if you do need to do those tweaks or changes or whatever it may be, then the product allows you to do that as well.
Exactly. And the way
Sure.
we do that is because we have built on top of Kubernetes. It makes our job pretty easy.
Hmm.
Kubernetes is well known enough where we've abstracted it away. And so when a customer has really custom requirements, um, they can add their own Kubernetes resources on top of PowerTools,
Okay. Yeah.
and that's powerful.
Well, it's pretty cool. I mean, that's a brilliant overview, and I know we dug a bit deep there into the platform. But I mean, one of the things that we spoke briefly about before we started this recording was this concept of the on-cloud movement. Now, I appreciate we've talked a bit around it there over the last sort of 20 minutes or so, but I mean, can we just like change track slightly and talk a little bit about that and what is this on cloud movement that we're starting to hear a little bit about now, and really why does it matter? What is that all about, Jon?
Totally. The on cloud movement to me is very much leaning into the fact that a lot of people are realizing that software teams want to be on AWS, GCP, or Azure. Every software team out there basically is building on one of those clouds to get started with. And what we're starting to realize is, as an industry, there's a new paradigm coming out where running on prem is now running in somebody's AWS account.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I really look at it, and I look at the next evolution of software and B2B products and SaaS products as, what are products that you can run in my AWS account for me? That the data lineage is very clear. It's staying within infrastructure on an account I own. It's staying in my AWS account. Dependencies are, not a third-party single point of failure, things like that.
Yeah.
And, for us, the on-cloud movement really is this new coming of age of software that runs in your cloud account. And that's what PowerTools is, right? Like, we're a platform that runs in your cloud account. And a lot of this is packaging software applications. I've seen a new company, Opstrace. They're basically a Datadog, observability platform that runs in your AWS account. And I think this movement is coming really quickly. And one of the reasons is, as software teams, we're starting to realize that we don't want 100 different dependencies. We want to know that things live and run in our accounts. And there's also things like, how is my data being used? There's a lot of security and sort of privacy issues that are happening. GDPR, for instance, this mandates that every developer is now thinking about where their data lives and what's going on. And so, I think this on-cloud movement is really this concept of software living in your own cloud account. And
I guess the way to frame it there is that traditionally you may have bought a monolith application and installed it on some tin sat in a data center, but now the new equivalent of that, this on-cloud movement, in my layman's terms of looking at it, is that deployment, that installation of that application is directly onto your own owned cloud platform. It may have been developed by a separate team or a separate company, but there's effectively, it could be licensing that software to you, and you just install it straight into your cloud platform of choice. Effectively, that's where you're going. Effectively, is it, Jon? Am I right in thinking that's what the on-cloud movement is kind of alluding to?
Absolutely. And there's this evolution where historically running things on prem has been really hard. If you look at open source is full of configurations and options. And I think a lot of people and maybe this is controversial as well, but open source isn't great for end-to-end products, because it's really great for infrastructure and for small pieces of the puzzle that can be glued together. But overall, there's very few sort of, that at least that I've seen, applications, whether it's admin panels or things like that, that truly work from end to end that you just install. The reason for that is it's really hard to maintain and set those products up. And ultimately, any open source community is going to move slower than a closed source product, simply because there's so many more pieces. There's the community to manage, the different roadmaps. Everyone has their own vision of where something's going, right? And so open source has not met the needs of this on-cloud movement, where it's truly like one command to deploy software or whatever into your cloud account.
I'm with you.
And that's really where PowerTools sits. We're closed source, and we believe that lets us move a lot faster, and gives us the optionality of not pleasing everybody, right?
Well, I guess it's in, a phrase we'd use in the UK is horses for courses. Every part of it has got a use case. So not that the open source movement isn't useful. Of course, it's useful in lots of different ways. But yeah, I get where you're pitching the PowerTools platform now, or the development. It's that gap between when you've got a number of these individual components or packages or libraries that do something. You want that end-to-end solution, that joined up approach. Now, yeah, I know what you're saying, that you're less likely to find those kind of open source projects, short of things, the obvious ones like Linux builds or Linux flavors, or big sponsored projects maybe by big vendor companies that have gone open source. I don't know. I'm not a hugely familiar with open source in those senses because I'm not a developer. But at the same time, I think I get where you're going there in terms that, yeah, if you want end-to-end software, more often than not, there is going to be a fee associated with that because it's been developed by more than just an individual as a solo developer uploading their content into a GitHub repo or something like that. It's going to have spent a long time in the process, and yeah, like you say, if you try and do that in open source, not to say that it probably couldn't be done, but it's less likely to be done for applications that you may want or need for your business. I guess then you've got that whole keeping up with the innovation side as well, because innovation is catching pace at such a rapid speed at the moment, and open source projects, I guess they, like you say, they take a bit of time to get off the ground and manage and get to the point. Yeah
and what's interesting is for us, we learned a lot about what software teams care about, right? And software teams, they want to have confidence in the products that they use. There's a reason why everyone builds on top of GitHub or GitLab. People aren't running their own Git servers anymore. People want managed services that just work, but they want them in their cloud account. And that's really interesting. As you go up market, you talk to bigger and bigger companies, they really care about where access to all of their infrastructure and their code and their data lives. And so what I see happening in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of B2B products that are actually solving business challenges, but they natively run in your own AWS account.
Sure.
And I'm saying AWS, GCP, Azure.
Yeah.
But the concept there of every product, and it's not just going to be for enterprise. Every B2B product is ultimately going to have the option to be run in your cloud account. And PowerTools for us is one piece of that. We would love to build a marketplace to power that sort of on cloud movement. That's something we're thinking about. We're thinking about a lot of these managed services and things that you can build on top of a platform. But ultimately, the thesis here is that, obviously developers have a ton of options. And, enterprise has a ton of options. But ultimately, startups, there's a new coming of age of products that are going to be run within your AWS and GCP account.
But it's cool. Sorry to chip in, John, but as you're talking there now, I'm casting my mind into the Azure marketplace, and I'm looking at the catalog of things that you can kind of download, and they've just been set up with an ARM template, yeah, and you can download and purchase and install, but then you've got to jump in and configure those products and hook them up with other components. So what you're saying is resonating quite strongly with the way, to say it quite frankly, when you jump into the Azure marketplace, yes, of course, there's some great products and third-party offerings that have effectively been built with, the typical things that I deal with quite frequently are things like NVAs, network virtual appliances, that have been built on top of, Azure components, by companies like Cisco and others like that. But They're we're very much still at that point at the moment. You know, like I say, I'm speaking my mind as you're mentioning this now, where it's literally set an ARM template up, deploy it into your Azure subscription, hop onto that particular appliance or whatever it is you've spun up, and then configure it, and make it do what you want. And this is now taking that to the next evolution. So effectively what you're saying is that those coming of age applications that all businesses are going to innovate and start moving more towards, they will eventually potentially end up in that marketplace. And something like PowerTools would be that engine to help business deploy those into customer cloud accounts, is what you're saying. Am I right in thinking that, John?
Absolutely. And you know, I have my own thoughts around the cloud marketplaces, but startups have the ability to live and breathe without marketplaces because they're so good at marketing, and they're good at building communities and things. And I think, you know, the on cloud movement to me is a lot about how will startups be deploying their software for companies in 5 years. And I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be, you know, when you sign up, you know, you're going to give access to your AWS account so that these different products can bootstrap inside of your AWS and install. And I think that is like so powerful and mind blowing to me, because it's like, you know, historically you look back and building an on prem offering was something you did when you had a Fortune 500 company on your platform.
Yeah,
right?
Sure thing. Yeah,
You're huge. And I think now it's this new requirement that's coming about because of this combination of GDPR and privacy and how's my data being used, right? Or even like more nuts and bolts, like because of this container movement in the browser, there's all this pushback on basically, you know, running cookie trackers and and analytics integrations that send your data to another domain. Like that's going away in 5 years. Even the Google Analytics metric stack is going to run in your own cloud account because you want it from a domain that you control and own. And I think that
we're seeing that kind of thing on the other way around now. You know, with Microsoft announcing apps being able to be run on, you know, private hosted kit, you know, in containers and Kubernetes clusters effectively. So you're starting to see that from the big vendors now. And of course, you know, Microsoft and Amazon, they've been doing this for years, I guess, in terms of actually deploying and running their own apps to service customers. But we're now starting to see those big vendor companies actually put those offerings out there themselves, that now you can run those tools anywhere you like. It's not just about being tied into one cloud platform or another, which I guess is what you're saying, is those kind of feature sets and abilities are available to the masses in certain respects. But is it fair to say we're still finding our way through this, you know, very meandering path? Is that the best way to put it, John?
Well, absolutely. And I think, you know, for me, I think a lot about this, and so I'll naturally bring up PowerTools. But to me, cloud capabilities are so complex that we're now itching for another abstraction, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned Kubernetes. Kubernetes is an abstraction over compute on top of the cloud. That's one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Serverless is another piece. Edge is another piece. You know, there's data applications, and you know, I think that whenever movements like this happen, you know, the to the cloud movement, right, was it required a bunch of abstractions. And I think that we're definitely on our way to software running natively in your own AWS, GCP, Azure accounts, as opposed to you integrating with a third-party API and sending your data somewhere else. And I think that I think it's interesting because it's like there's a lot of abstractions that we need. There's a lot of tooling that we need to you know to make that work, and so that it's natural to build a product that runs decentralized as it is centralized. And I think that's really where the opportunity in the market is. I think we're 5 years away from like the next Datadog launching and Datadog, you know, being in your cloud account first. And it's an interesting evolution that's happening, and it's a lot of things hitting at once. It's this pushback against centralization. It's you know, the decentralized web where, you know, you're thinking about, hey, I don't want whatever company to have all access to everything of mine. it's GDPR, it's, obviously fintech and healthcare companies are exploding. Like, I've been doing startups for a long time, and I can never remember a time when there were as many fintech and healthcare startups. Like, it's just easier to build those now. And then ultimately, I think it's pushback on privacy. Like, the browsers really dictate everything. And so if you combine those requirements with all the best practices around shipping software quick, there's a ton of like glue to make that all work in your own account.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, and so it's interesting with this new evolution, and software companies care a lot about this, and they're only going to care more and more,
Sure.
especially with B2B products that touch your data. I'm helping a company. They're setting up, Mixpanel, and Mixpanel is an iOS application it's like an SDK that lets you instrument your iOS apps. And
okay,
it's kind of crazy to think, like, with so many things changing in the world of software, products like that are going to be mandated to run in your cloud account for a lot of companies. And I think that there's so many products that are going to go through this evolution. And everyone in companies now is thinking about, like, where is our data? Who has access to our data? Where does our data live? And that's really driving a lot of this on cloud movement. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about it, especially as regulations and things happen across, the world. And even like things like, I think GDPR is really interesting. Going multi-region is something that's kind of been like a luxury to a lot of software companies, but it's going to be a requirement for a lot of companies now, where it's like you're building GDPR in day one, and so you're multi-region day one by default. And so I also think that, we need a lot more abstractions. And, the problem with abstractions in today's world of software is that abstractions try to be everything to everybody. And that's kind of a result of open source. Open source tries to make products be something to everybody. And this new on-cloud movement, I think there's going to be tens of different types of platforms to deploy on-cloud apps.
Sure.
Because, one, and we've seen it, like, you look at the developer landscape, like, there's 100 different ways to deploy a container, and there's the same thing's going to happen at a higher level to deploy full applications.
Yeah, and it's cool. It's cool to see because obviously, like I said, and for those that watch my channel, they know I'm not a developer, but as I say to people, I know enough to be dangerous. So it's cool to chat with somebody like you, Jon, and you give me that kind of heads up as what's going on in that space because it's a different world to where I currently work. But there are a lot of synergies, there are a lot of crossovers just with the concept and the way that we work. And yeah, I think you're right. It's certainly an interesting time over there. Well, it has been for the last few years, and it certainly continues to be, and quite where we go is going to be cool. I think one of the things that always springs up in my mind is certainly when you talk about abstraction and putting those higher level kind of things that we can kind of just get rid of the noise effectively, is that all of a sudden you start to lose that I'm probably showing my age a bit now, but you hark back to mainframes when they were all centralized systems and you operated a mainframe, and effectively that's now the cloud. What, 20, 30 years later, you're kind of losing that lower level knowledge, or is it being instructed? Is it being taught in classes or like people coming straight into the IT industry now from college? And this is all they know, so these layers of abstraction then kind of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Jon, but sometimes I think, is it not a good thing to learn about the lower level bits, or will it get to the point where it'll just move on and those abstraction layers will be built straight into the chips, and how far does it go?
It's interesting because I think it also goes back to hiring. Like, as an industry, one of the problems I feel like is fundamental to our industry is this pressure when you're learning to code, to understand everything that goes on underneath the hood. I don't think it's realistic. I think in 10 to 15 years, the abstractions are going to be so strong and so useful that, it's a novelty to understand all those layers underneath and how. And I will say that with Apple switching to a new instruction set with the M1s, like I've seen more developers talking about architectures and instruction sets than I ever have, and so I think like no one in before like not no one, but like it was pretty rare to be a Rails developer, a full stack developer, and be thinking even about ARM versus AMD and I don't know.
But that's going to be that's another thing, isn't it? That's going to be a thing now with ARM chips being low powered and so ubiquitous as IoT. That's the next thing as well, isn't it? So that's a cool movement at the moment as well. I think this is the bottom line, isn't it, John? I think we're just at this time where we're here working in the IT industry, in different parts of the IT industry, but the shift is just so massive and vast and frequent. It's sometimes is very overwhelming. So it kind of harps back to a lot of conversations I've had with other guests on this show. Is staying on top of this kind of game, and staying on top of this as best you can, and finding your way through finding your own pathway. I guess using the tool sets that you find most useful. For you, I guess, as a developer or an ops person, or whatever it is that you happen to be working in. So. I mean, I'll flick back to the website for a minute, John. I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation, John. Thanks again so much coming on. I mean, we're about to hit the hour mark now, which is cool. So, I mean, I've just called the website back up on the screen now. I mean, are there any parting points or bits of info that are worthy getting out there now, John, before we wrap it up for today?
I think we've covered quite a few different topics, and I think we could, at least for me, I can talk about this stuff all day. So I always need to.
That's cool. Yeah, we'll set up a mini series. But no, I mean, I'm gonna certainly try and dip into this, John, and have a little look myself, and get a bit closer. One of the things for my own personal journey at the moment, I'm trying to get back into the very small amount of developer background that I've got. I'm trying to get back into that to some regard, but it's a cool platform. It's cool development. I love how you've explained it to me today, and I'm sure everybody that's watching now, they'll equally see the value of this and reach out to you now over obviously your Twitter handles on the screen there, and PowerTools.dev. We'll put the links in the article associated with this video. But no, that's been fantastic, John. Thanks so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed that. Had a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate, talking the topic. And, if anyone has any questions or want to talk further, please reach out.
No, absolutely. But that's brilliant. Thanks again, John, and I'll catch you very soon.
Thank you so much.